from Alabama is now recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the chairman for holding this hearing, and Secretary Geithner, I thank you for returning to our committee to discuss the President's proposals for regulatory reform. The administration has presented to Congress a far-reaching regulatory reform proposal, which, as of today, has failed to achieve anything approaching consensus, either on Capitol Hill or even among the federal regulators who would be responsible for implementing it. The lesson that we learned from the events that led to the financial crisis and subsequent government actions is that our 1930 regulatory system is not up to the task of monitoring the safety and soundness of complex financial institutions in the 21st century. We do need smarter regulation, but not necessarily more regulation. We need enforcement of existing regulation, not another layer of regulation or more government bureaucracy. And finally, what we do not need, and what we've had too often, is government policies which encourage harmful business practices or incentivize those practices, or when they went terribly wrong, bless them with bailouts. The chairman used the term liquidate and resolve, and I think that most of my colleagues welcome that as opposed to what the administration started by saying, and the chairman using words like rescue, because rescue implies that the taxpayers will be presented with the ultimate bill. Unfortunately, the administration's regulatory reform plan continues the pattern that we have seen with health care and energy of a big government solution that replaces individual choices with bureaucratic mandates. Their plan establishes the Federal Reserve as a systemic risk regulator, despite the fact that the Fed has historically done a poor job of identifying and addressing systemic risk before they become crises. It tasks the Fed with identifying a class of systemically significant firms that the market will view as too big to fail, as the chairman said, and then compounds this mistake by creating a so-called resolution authority that will promote continued taxpayer-funded bailouts of these institutions rather than actually unwinding and shutting down their operations. And finally, the administration plan would establish a massive new government bureaucracy known as Consumer Financial Protection Agency, which consumers will ultimately pay for on top of the numerous regulatory agencies and the regulatory legislation and patchwork that currently exists. Mr. Chairman, my deep-seated reservations about the administration's financial reform proposals, which again I point out are shared by members on both sides of the aisle and many of the regulators themselves, should not be interpreted as a rejection of common sense reform. Although Republicans have taken a different path than the administration's, we're not saying no to reform. Republicans are saying no to more bailouts and no to more of the same approach of misguided government regulations and interventions which helped bring about the crisis in the first place. Republicans have offered a clear alternative to the administration's approach to reform and will continue to do so. The Republican plan promotes effective consumer protection by streamlining and consolidating the functions of the bank regulators, including consumer protection, into a unified agency. In the bailouts, our plan directs all failed non-banks to an enhanced bankruptcy process that will force creditors and counterparties of those firms to bear the cost of failure rather than sticking the taxpayer with the tab. To promote sound monetary policy, our plan relieves the Fed of its current supervisory duties and prohibits the Fed from bailing out any specific financial institution. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary, I thank both of you. Look forward to working with you and my colleagues in the months ahead as we address regulatory reform. Thank you.
And